has made has some allowable levels of chaos and evil. But this does not imply that God doesn't care about justice or morality. This is maybe the most difficult part of this speech, and I think this is actually where God's going to, in my opinion, and this is the case I'm going to make as we go through the second speech of Job, as far as I can see, this is what the point God's making in his second speech as well. That there is, in his world, some allowable levels of chaos and evil, but God, it's not just that God, it doesn't just, I'm about to say double negative. It doesn't just not imply that God doesn't care about justice and morality, but actually, he's going to talk about in the second speech how he has a plan in the sense that he's understanding of it, and he's bigger than the evil and the chaos. He is more capable, more competent. He is more powerful than the forces of chaos and evil in the world. And so in his second speech, I think what I see God saying in the second speech with these kind of illustrative pictures of himself as a divine warrior and this behemoth and this Leviathan is God is painting a picture that there are forces at work that are huge and monstrous and beyond comprehension and beyond human ability to tackle or to wrestle with, and yet God is way bigger than those, and he's going to conquer those eventually. And I think, but mostly, spoiler alert, what those look forward to is ideas like the Leviathan, this giant serpent, look forward to maybe some other giant serpents the Bible talks about often, which is Satan and everything he represents. And so I think that these things tie in really, really nicely. So that'll be kind of the subject matter for the next 3 weeks of class, more or less, I think. I mean, we'll wrap up the whole thing on the 6th of November in 3 weeks. But this idea, I think, is really the culminating point, the climax and the conclusion of the book of Job. And so we're going to wrestle through and discuss these things for a bit ahead. So that's his first speech. And then tonight we're going to look at the second speech of God. I didn't put all the verses up there because it was too much. But I do think it'd be good. Could I get a volunteer to read Job chapter 40? Let's see here. Job chapter 40, verses, verses 6 through 14. Job 40, 6 through 14. Go ahead, Dave.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, "Now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with eminence and dignity, and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on everyone who is proud and make him low. Look on everyone who is proud and humble them, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind them in the hidden place. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you."
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. So as God starts again, this comes right after, in the first 6 verses of Job 40, where God says, "Will you continue to contend with me? Will the fault finder contend with the Almighty?" And Job says, "No, I'm insignificant. I'll put my hand on my mouth. I'm not going to speak anymore." And so God then takes his silence as an opportunity to continue himself. And that's where Dave picked up for us. So how does God describe himself in verses 9 through 11? I kind of already tipped my hand what I think about this. But how does he seem to describe himself here, especially in verses 9 through 11? He's describing himself in contrast to Job, right? He's asking rhetorical questions. Job, are you like this? And again, he doesn't literally describe himself, but he is describing himself, isn't he? How would you paint that description that he gives? Let's look at this.
I thought 11 was really interesting because it's really hard to humble anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found this interesting. And I'm not answering your question, I guess, exactly, but just little parts of him that seem so hard for us. And humbling a man is a hard thing to do, right? That seems to only come from God sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of really big ticket items that we just can't do. We just, we can't clothe ourselves in majesty and honor,
Yeah.
and, right? And then maybe someone
Yeah.
the big items.
No, you're right. And that's a great point. And so it does get to like, he's describing himself as someone who is like, there's a great chasm, right? There are things that describe him that he's able to do that are completely out of the ballpark for Job, and by extension, of course, for us as well. What else do you guys see in here? Any other prominent ideas or important observations? I think it's important not to miss the initial in verse 9. An arm like God's, a thunderous voice like his. And even the pouring out of the overflowings of anger. All of this is, again, last week we looked at the similar language with the storm, how often in the Old Testament when God shows up in the storm, he's bringing vengeance and justice and retribution. He's showing up as a warrior to bring these things to nations and peoples who have really been unfaithful and acted wickedly. And not just in ways that don't please God, which they are, but also in ways that are just true and real that we see in the world that break everything. And so God shows up to bring justice and to help the afflicted. And so I think even to Kim's point, this idea that he also, he humbles the people who need to be humbled. That's what even the next verses, right? Look on everyone who is proud and humble him too. Tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, and bind them in the hidden place. He's really describing himself, in my estimation, as this kind of, he's the sheriff. He's the one who's coming, who's going to put things in their place as they ought to be. And this is really at the heart of it, everything that Job was saying God wasn't doing. God, don't you see where I'm at? Don't you see what's going on with me? Don't you understand my case? And everything God's saying is, yeah, Job, I totally understand it. And I understand it better than you do, in fact. And I am the divine kind of one who's going to be bringing justice. So I answer my own question again. Any other ideas about this question? How does it directly answer Job's complaint about divine injustice? These couple of verses.
I have one question before maybe
Go ahead.
You don't mind. I was just wondering if you saw a connection from verse 9 to 14, where he talks about the arm of God, and then it's like in your own right hand can save you.
Yeah.
Is that like a subset of his arm? Like you had an arm like this, and you just your right hand can save you, or is that maybe a separate connection in your opinion?
I don't know. I think that it's hard not to see those being connected, because this is like the beginning and end of a thought, right? And so certainly the contrast of God's mighty arm and Job's, ineffectual hand, I think really do paint the picture of everything he's saying. I think it's a good observation to see in this, right? Just to note that this whole time he's asking Job to really stack himself up next to God and see how much could he affect, how much could he change? If you were up here with me in my position, could you really do this? Could you really change these things? And could you even save yourself? And the answer is no. So I think there is, I think that is a good observation to make here. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was curious. I mean, I didn't know if the right hand was more symbolic of some kingship thing, or I didn't know if there was a connection really.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
There might be, and it's good. It's good insight for sure. Good. Any other thoughts about how this might answer Job's question about God's divine, the complaint about God's divine injustice? Go ahead, Ricky.
In verse 8, he said, would you indeed annul my judgment? So I think he's asking everything that Job had stated.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I was dead. And the judgment is,
Mm-hmm.
God, if this is your judgment, then I don't want to,
Yeah.
I'd rather not even be, And so I think he's just saying, look, even though you went through this, Job, I got, I'm God. Can you do anything about what you're going through?
Yeah.
Can you do anything about know anything about what you did
Yeah.
or didn't? I do. I understand everything about what you've been through.
Yeah.
And it's just not, there's nothing that you've said that made any sense to me.
Yeah. That changed anything, right? There's nothing you said that was, yeah.
Can't change it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really this idea when he's showing him how much is, I mean, in the first speech he really did this. And this is a good follow-up to the first speech where he starts to say, look, if you can't do all these things, then I'll confess to you that you're right and you're good on your own. But you know and I know that that's not true. And so you need to be, again, that's ironic. He is humbling Job through the process of this. And so why is this idea then of God being described as this divine warrior significant? And if God's showing up saying, hey, I humble the proud man. I tread down the wicked where they stand. When we read this idea of God being a warrior who can do this, how would Job have heard that, you think? Any recent events in Job's life that might have made him interpret those words differently? It's interesting, right? To me, it's interesting. I think that Job would have heard it and been like, well, because God's not saying he's treading him down, but it's like, there's a lot, I think, that we have to, for me, when I hear this, I think about this idea that God shows up and he's really presenting himself as, through the storm and through the thunder and through the language he says about how he brings justice and how he treads down the wicked and humbles the proud. He's showing up as this one who says, hey, this is all on my shoulders. I bear the responsibility and the reputation here. You're not at stake for this. I'm at stake for this. And I think this idea of God being the divine warrior is the first piece that we're going to see in the second speech that's important to observe and to see, because God is presenting this case that he has things not just handled, but he's going to battle with the things that Job is himself battling with. Ricky?
I was thinking, since I don't know, he's on the downside of his healing, coming out of all the sores and everything that he had gone through physically. It doesn't say. But God is saying, Job, I know who did that to you. Mm-hmm. And in spite of me knowing and you not knowing, and what you said, you're not correct, but I know something that you don't know, and I always will.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't answer me, even if you knew, you wouldn't have to answer me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think in these questions that God asks, I think it both speaks to how impossible it is to know God's mind, and it also invites Job to consider it. And so I think this is one of the things we have to balance out in this as we read it and process it. We can't give up in despondency and think that what God's saying is you'll never get it. But I think the invitation here is to continually humbly consider and to not feel like, because I think the conclusion that I can't figure it out is just as dangerous as the conclusion that I have it figured out already. Both of them lead you to a lack of passion and desire to really see God and what he's doing actively, which I think is everything God is. That's really the main point of all this, and maybe to get us right back on track, is that's what God's really trying to invite Job to see. That's what he did in the first speech, and he's doing the second speech. He's inviting Job to see that you don't need to be despondent because I'm in control, and I'm stronger, I'm bigger than all the problems that are going on, and I have more than considered everything that you've said before you even said it. And this is the challenge here, right? Because sometimes one of the things you have to keep in mind is that these aren't God speaking in a vacuum. God's speaking to Job after everything Job and his friends have said. And God's already spoken as well. And so all these things mean that God is making a point to Job about his sufferings, about the things Job has said specifically. And again, Job's lost his kids, lost everything, but the most difficult part to think is he doesn't get his kids back. He gets more kids, right? He doesn't know that he's going to at this point, but he does. But do you think that just made everything okay after all this? I mean, that's something you have to imagine that Job, even as he understood God better, still wrestled with till he died. Still mourned and wept and dealt with till the day he died. And so we have to appreciate these aren't just, what God's saying here can't just be hey, it is, but it has to be more, I think, than God's saying, I'm just bigger than you, or you can't understand me. There is that, but we have to see more in it. Because Job, after all of this, is going to come to a completely different conclusion. And we have to wonder why, or else the God's speech doesn't make much sense. So let's get into the speech, because there's a second part of the speech. He first describes himself kind of as this one who can, adorned with eminence and dignity, clothed with honor and majesty, who is, strong and mighty, thundering arm, and all of this that we've just been talking about. And then he gets into this business about describing the behemoth in verses 15 through 24. So I want you to ask these questions as we read this section. How does God describe behemoth in these verses, and what impact does the imagery shared about this creature have on us? Here are the verses. Can I get a volunteer to read these for us, please? Go ahead, Chase.
Behold now the behemoth which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold now his strength in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thoughts are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food. All of the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down, and the covert of the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Could anyone capture him when he is on watch? With barbs, could anyone pierce his nose?
Awesome. Thanks, Chase. So how does God describe behemoth, and what impact does the imagery have as we read it? Powerful, right? Good. What else? So it's powerful. This is behemoth, which, by the way, the Leviathan is like its own name for something very specific. We'll talk about this. Mentioned other places in the Bible. Behemoth really isn't. And the word is just the singular word for a group of animals. So it's kind of like the animal of animals is almost how you could think about this. So it's just like, behemoth is almost the word for like the super beast is how some people say it. Like that's, yeah, exactly. He's the big guy. He's the one. So there's a kind of a singularness to the behemoth, and there is kind of a nondescript generality to him in a sense, which is puzzling. So, yeah, he's powerful. What else?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
This is like Jurassic Park.
Yes.
He's beyond that. This
Yeah.
behemoth is even beyond
Yeah.
the dinosaurs that we've seen in
Yeah.
Jurassic Park 2, 3, 4, whatever.
Yeah.
However-
Have you seen 5 though? I'm kidding.
But the imagery, see, for me, when I think of a behemoth, we talk about different machines,
Mm-hmm.
and there are machines that can carry 500 or 600 tons
Yeah.
of material.
Mm-hmm.
That's a behemoth
Yeah.
compared to some of these, even the largest of the largest.
Yeah.
This thing is like,
Yeah.
you see it, you go, oh,
Yes.
and that's what its imagery is.
Yeah.
And God is telling them, even with that, I'm still
Yeah.
take care of the.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. That's the point he's making, right? He's saying I'm bigger than this, right? But it is interesting because, like, this is one of the most perplexing, maybe a lot of you waiting for this part of this class. See, what are we going to say about these creatures, the behemoth and Leviathan? I'm not sure if my answer is going to satisfy. And also, my answer, by the way, it doesn't really matter. Like, we all have to come to our conclusions about this. I do believe that there is a significance to these creatures that is beyond just being normal creatures. I think that they are basically my conclusion, and I'm pretty convinced of it, that is they are supernatural creatures that aren't really real, but they are real, and they are physical, poetic embodiments of like dark forces in the world. Basically, I think the idea, like, you read this picture, and the idea is, because even, like, They are. It's like it's describing these huge creatures. Some people say this is the hippopotamus, right? He's in the river and he's mighty. I mean, hippopotamus have killed more people in Africa than lions have. They are dangerous animals. But we've tamed. I mean, go to the zoo, you'll see baby hippos, and you're like, oh, look, they're so cute. You know, it's like we've tamed them, and they might be kind of true. You can say, well, it's just artistic license. But again, it kind of does diminish God's point. If he's making this point that I'm this great, powerful God, I'm even more powerful than a hippo, you're like, well, maybe you should dream a little bigger. God, like, to your point, Ricky, we make things that are more stronger than hippos. And even dinosaurs, I would say. If he is talking about dinosaurs, I do believe that even dinosaurs don't really match the significance of what he's saying to some extent, where he's saying, especially with the Leviathan, we're going to see this, that there is no way that human beings could kill these creatures. That's the impact of this. There's no way, Job and your friends, when you think about this creature I'm describing to you, there is no way that you could do anything about it ever in a million years, no matter how many of you there were. And so my conclusion that I think he's making, I think he's using these pictures of created things as a manifestation of the chaotic difficulties and the challenging, this kind of as an embodiment for all the pain and suffering and brokenness of the world, in a sense, that enforces its will upon people. And there's reasons for this, right? There's actually a lot of ancient Near Eastern mythologies that, especially the Leviathan, we'll see. The Leviathan, this is totally true, but the Behemoth, there is less evidence for, but there is still some, where these kind of big mythological creatures were talked about as physical manifestations of the evils in the world. I mean, you watch the myths of our time, right? Watch Disney movies from way long ago. Sleeping Beauty, what's the big villain at the end? This huge, dark, evil dragon, right? Like, it's just the embodiment of evil and chaos and all these things that make sense to us. And my last point about this, and we can talk more about this, we will talk more about this, I'm sure, is this is poetry. And I think God's saying, look, I've made this as well as I've made you. Everything in this creation is a part of my creation. And consider him, right? Look at him. And look at how strong and powerful and challenging and foreboding this creature is. So we're going to look at more at Behemoth and Leviathan. But that's kind of my 2 cents about it. Any other thoughts about this description of Behemoth? Go ahead, Dave.
Well, we know we find dinosaur bones,
Mm-hmm.
so we know dinosaurs are real.
Yes.
So mythical,
Yeah.
not mythical, they were real.
I wasn't saying dinosaurs are mythical, by the way. I hope no one thought that. I was not trying to make a case that dinosaurs are mythological creatures.
This is more meaty of a conversation, but it ain't no hippopotamus, because a hippopotamus doesn't bend its tail like a cedar.
Yeah.
And then, if a river rages, he is not alarmed.
Mm-hmm.
So that means it's big. And then limbs are like bars. So this throws me down the line of thinking that this took, how does this play in with the timing of when Job would have been written?
Yeah.
Because obviously Job would know what he's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So does that give a time reference?
Yeah.
That's one thing I think about it.
Sure.
And then, well, I'm not going to say, but I guess my thinking is, and I'm not going to say bank on it because when dinosaurs went away in the flood,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, that's what my brain tells me. That's
Sure.
right.
I gotcha.
You know
I
what I'm
gotcha.
saying?
Yeah. No, listen.
And the Nephilim, I was also thinking, we were talking about mythological and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And it's like the Nephilim, that's like something, I've been in the church my whole life, and
Yeah.
in the last couple decades or whatever, I'm hearing this Nephilim, and it's kind of, well, what's this all about?
Yeah.
I never caught that part.
If I can calm your spirit, people have been talking about the Nephilim since the beginning of the church. But it does ebb and flow. But it is a lot of mythology and confusion around it for sure. This stuff listen, I'm humbly putting forth this case, and I think that it ties the conclusion of the book of Job up the nicest. And the discussion about it possibly being dinosaurs or affirming the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs, all those things, I'm just ignorant of, quite frankly. I'm not a biologist, I'm not a paleontologist or any of those things. And so I'm not saying it's dismissed either, because these are, this is a difficult text in this sense. It's difficult to see what God is specifically talking about. And it's interesting, if it were the hippopotamus, he could have said that. If it were even a dinosaur, or something like, the word that he uses is like, they aren't words that, anyway, I guess that gets into tricky places as well. There's so much ignorance here is all I'm trying to say for anybody who makes a claim on this. And so in the place of silence, or which is another word for ignorance, the best path forward is saying, well, what makes the most sense to the text? What makes the most sense in the context of everything? What makes the most sense to make the conclusion? And then if it's still talking about dinosaurs or hippopotamuses or crocodiles, fine. It doesn't really, really matter at the end of the day. Because God's making a case to Job about his suffering, not about the biology of his creation. The biology of his creation, or what he's created, is an evidence in a sense. I understand he is making arguments there, but it's not the point nonetheless. And so I am convinced that these, we'll talk more about this. But Ricky, what are you going to say?
When I read it, I understand the behemoth and but I'm looking at, just like Job, there are problems that are going to be huge.
Yeah.
They're going to be so out of your reasoning that the imagery, I have to give this imagery to tell you what your suffering is like. Because if I describe it how I know it is, you wouldn't even understand it.
Yeah.
Even if I give you this imagery, you're not going to understand it. So, for me, there have been events and situations that have hit me like a balloon.
Yeah.
And I was, just like Job, I couldn't get my breath. And still, it's like, oh my. There are times and days, and I can get up and sit on the edge of the bed, and I think about healing. And some of the sufferings that people go through, my girls, people that have done things that are huge, that are beyond anything that I can comprehend. I can look at it and go, how in the world? What are they going to do? What this thing is beyond any. So that imagery, for me, it brings it down to where I go, oh my goodness. And I take a deep breath and go, this is too much for me.
Yeah.
But God says, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. 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 Dave, you had your hand up too, and we need to move on soon.
I'm also looking too, and it says, behold now behemoth, verse 15, which I made as well as you. So
Yeah.
we're talking about something real.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think he's explaining it like that because Job can relate to what the definition is. But I also want to say that we all know that everybody wants answers to these questions. And these are the first questions out of people that are interested in the Bible.
Sure.
Stuff, if they know about this.
Sure.
And it's kind of like, this isn't stuff that pertains to your salvation. This is totally separate.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah. There's a lot to say here, and there's more to say. True too. Look, let's keep moving on. Look at Leviathan here in chapter 41. So as God introduces Leviathan in the beginning of chapter 41, he asks a series of rhetorical questions. And I want to ask us, how does it serve to introduce us to this other creature? If we were confused about Behemoth, God has almost twice, maybe more than twice, to say about Leviathan. And this is peculiar, right? Look here in Job 41 and verse 1. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Or will he speak to you with soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be laid low even at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. So again, right, we're starting to see a similar picture, right? God's presenting something similar. Why do you think God asks, what's the force of these rhetorical questions? And why does God ask these series of questions, you think, to introduce us to Leviathan? What's the impact? When questions like this are kind of, layered on us one after the other, what's the impact that they have?
Can you catch it?
Yeah. No. Nope.
Look at it, can you control it?
Yep.
Can you control, Job, everything that you've gone through, could you control it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so we can put us, and I'll say, I can put myself, like, wow, right? Be the
Yeah.
problem,
Yes.
issue.
Sure.
And there's nothing, man, I can't control nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the emotions that just like Job, I wish I had never been born.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a thing, you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
Job, don't start blabbing something that you don't understand.
Yeah. It's important for this speech to remember that in Job's, I think his first speech, early on in Job asks them he wishes they would bring out Leviathan again, and that they would call on Leviathan, that the whole, if you read Job 3 in verse 8, let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. Let the stars of its twilight be darkened, let it wait for light but have none, let it not see the breaking dawn. This verse is really interesting in Job 3 and verse 8 and 9, because he's seeming to say there are people who are like invoking Leviathan to come into the world, and if Leviathan did come into the world, it seems like the whole world would end, right, in Job 3. And so when God brings it up, he says, do you really want to arouse him in verse 10? I think when God says in verse 9, your expectation is false, he's responding to Job in chapter 3. Job, you want Leviathan to be roused? That's how bad your life is? You don't even know what you would do if that happened. And so this creature, again, like these reasons, again, like Leviathan being mentioned in Job 3 and here, again, it seems to be this representation. Mythological may be the wrong word for it. It's a representation for real things in this world. It's a representation for the elements of this world that are supernatural maybe, but are still a part of this world. It could be in reference to the spiritual forces. I mean, we read in Job 1 and 2 about God's heavenly places and all the sons of God coming before him and presenting them. They all have work going on, the accuser being one of them, and he presents himself there, and he's accusing Job, right? I mean, maybe the Leviathan and Behemoth are representations for Satan himself, who is parading around the world, He's not literally a lion, and yet or not literally even a serpent, but both of these manifestations are the ways we talk about him. Behemoth and Leviathan, to some extent, in my opinion, illustrate Satan's mighty, like, the power he has in our lives better than even those creatures can. Jesse?
Yeah, with your point, it seems like you can almost substitute it for they're monsters. Right?
Yeah.
Like monsters of the earth and monsters of the ocean. Basically everything that man inhabits,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like no matter where man goes, there are these giant monsters, or were these monsters, like dinosaurs, whatever they were. Like there was something, this big sea monster, there was something out there, and God created it, and it terrified men, and men were powerless against it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And God made that, and that was not a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? And he's like, I made these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And who can stand before me now?
Yeah.
Right? That's the point of all this is who can stand before me when the worst thing you can imagine that you've ever seen that you would fear to face in real life is nothing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really well put. The sea itself represented chaos in the whole ancient Near East. Like the whole sea was just an embodiment Even in Hebrew, even in the Psalms, I think you see this, where the sea is a manifestation of chaos, let alone a giant lizard creature from the sea representing chaos even more accurately, right? All this idea, like there is, even in the pages of the Bible, this is in Isaiah 27, Leviathan is mentioned, Psalm 74, Psalm 104, Job 3, Job, Job 41 here. And then you look at Revelation, and there's a beast of the land in Revelation and a beast of the sea. And it's like, it seems like these pictures all, there is, to me, there is an idea here where God has been continually talking about his battle with Satan and the demonic forces as a battle with these terms in terms we can grab that are these huge creatures that are monstrous, and yet he's way stronger than them. And that's what, when God talks about it here, what's kind of striking, the next question I had, what kind of tone does God have as he talks about Leviathan? You look at the next verse after we stopped, verse 12. He starts to go on and say, I'm not going to keep silent concerning his limbs. Oh, you thought I was going to stop? God goes on how many more verses? 22 more verses. He just goes on and on and on about Leviathan. He's like, have you considered this about him? Or what about this? Look how strong, look how mighty, look how, he breathes fire. He's unbelievable. And it's almost like God isn't just he's saying, look how awesome this thing I've created is. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. And yet I've created it. And it's funny, as God talks more and more about the power of this unholy serpent, what does it imply about God? I mean, we think about opponents. When you're scared of someone, you ad hominem, right? You insult them, you belittle them. But when you're not scared of someone, you're like, you compliment them, right? I mean, God's not afraid of them. Anyway, Dave?
I find it seems like, I don't know if you're going to get here or not, but it seems like verse 11 and above about Leviathan could be about a real creature.
Mm-hmm.
Then after verse 11, that's when it's kind of, to me, switches to Satan.
Yep.
Verse 11 is, everything under heaven is mine.
Yeah.
But then when you get down to after all those 20-some verses, he is, on earth there's nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is the king over the children of pride.
Yeah.
I kind of like there's a changing point there. It seems like.
Yeah. Possibly. Yeah. I think. I haven't thought about that. I didn't notice that change. It does seem to me like he's talking about one thing in this whole section, but I do think I think that's an interesting observation. I think again, I can't be dogmatic about any of these things. I don't know, frankly. And that's the hard thing about these sections and why they're so perplexing and so fascinating, is because we all have to, no matter how much you study this or look into this, there's a lot of, it's poetry, and so there's a lot of mystery and poetry of God, and there's a lot of mystery in these creatures he's describing that he uses specifically abstract kind of abstract language for, and so we're all putting these things together, and so I think that's a really good insight into this section to see that that could be a break in this where he is describing two different things, but. We'll continue this discussion next week. So, bring the popcorn and we'll continue to figure this out together. But I think when we start to see these things, we're going to see that he's making a point to Job that Job would have loved. And the fact is that as much chaos and darkness as Job had faced in his life, God's saying, one day I'm going to conquer it. And so everything you faced, all the sorrows, all the sadness, all the brokenness in your life, Job, I'm not going to make it right. No one could make it right. But I'm going to destroy the things that brought it. I'm going to end them because I'm in control. And I think that is the only message that would have comforted Job, the only one. And that's why I think that's what convinces me that he's talking about that Behemoth and Leviathan are these things. Anyway, I love you all. We'll continue this discussion next Wednesday night, Lord willing.